people are realizing that because existing laws are not being enforced, Americans are being killed by people who shouldn't be here in the first place.
I hope that people will understand that both immigrant and ally communities in Knoxville stand with immigrants.
The death of a young man in Knoxville is stirring new frustration among people on all sides of the immigration debate. The suspect in the case was driving without a license, without registration, and he is now in the custody of federal immigration authorities.
44-year-old Francisco Eduardo posted bond on a charge of criminally negligent homicide in Knox County. ICE immediately escorted him to an undisclosed detention center.
The son of that suspect told 10 News his father has been living in the country illegally for more than a decade. 10 News reporter Mark Salinger shows us how this case has now become part of the ongoing national debate about immigration. Mark?
Robin and John, in the middle of a government shutdown centered on illegal immigration, the death of Pierce Corcoran is making headlines around the country. The car crash on Chapman Highway now has people all over the country talking.
Days after she laid her son to rest, Pierce Corcoran's mother, Wendy, opened up to the world about losing her son. We are all aware as a family that nothing will ever bring Pierce back. But don't tell me my son, who lived in this country and followed its rules, doesn't deserve better, she wrote in part. Do the right thing and come here legally and become a responsible citizen, she finished. Police say Francisco Eduardo hit Corcoran's car when he swerved into oncoming traffic to avoid a slowing vehicle. While Francisco Eduardo faces a criminally negligent homicide charge, the story is fueling a debate over illegal immigration.
My gosh, come here the right way.
Maria Espinoza co-founded the Remembrance Project, which aims to memorialize Americans killed by illegal immigrants. The organization made a memorial panel for Pierce, and the Corcoran family have expressed their thanks to them online.
Because existing laws are not being enforced, Americans are being killed by people who shouldn't be here in the first place.
On the other side of the debate,
I hope that people will understand that both immigrant and ally communities in Knoxville stand with immigrants.
Megan Conley, with Allies of Knoxville's Immigrant Neighbors, says she's not surprised about where the conversation has shifted, but says it's not accurate.
Immigrants, both authorized and unauthorized, are far less likely to commit any kind of crime, including violent crime, than U.S.-born citizens.
Pierce's life is to be remembered and celebrated for his relationship with his Heavenly Father, Wendy Corcoran wrote. He was compassionate towards others who might look differently than he, or who might speak differently than he.
And newly sworn-in Congressman Tim Burchett tweeted that Pierce's story was an example of why America needs border security. The story also made headlines on Fox News this weekend. Robin and John.
Mark Salinger on that part of the story. Thank you.
Well, police want the public's help to